This is not a general rule of thumb that we should follow in life. But in specific situations, God will use things that can't even be in direct opposition to previously stated commands in order to, better his people. What's up, cool people? My name's Matt. Welcome back to our Bible study. Alright. So, we're looking at Judges chapter 14. And this is all about Samson, who we read about his birth and the details surrounding that. Details surrounding that. That was a combination of around and surrounding. Anyway. Oh, man. Off to a great start there, Matt. Okay, so we're looking at Judges 14, continuing the story of Samson, which we really only got a slight little introduction to. The last chapter mentioned details of his birth and that he's supposed to be a Nazirite, which was a particular kind of vow of extra devotion, dedication, also like some limitations, but in order to further dedicate oneself to the Lord. So that's really all the more information I think we need going into this, because there's not too much more context other than Israel is currently being ruled / bothered, at least significantly, by the Philistines. So, yeah. With all that in mind, let's hop in. Judges chapter 14. One day when Samson was in Timnah, one of the Philistine women caught his eye. When he returned home, he told his father and mother, "A young Philistine woman in Timnah caught my eye. I want to marry her. Get her for me." His father and mother objected. "Isn't there even one woman in our tribe, or among all the Israelites you could marry?" they asked. "Why must you go to the pagan Philistines to find a wife?" But Samson told his father, "Get her for me. She looks good to me." His father and mother didn't realize the Lord was at work in this, creating an opportunity to work against the Philistines who ruled over Israel at that time. So, further confirming that, the Philistines were ruling over Israel and causing them some problems. But, Samson marrying someone who was not an Israelite was in direct opposition to the Lord's prior commands to the Israelites. He said that they weren't supposed to intermarry with other people groups because they would be led astray. They would end up, following other gods. Not that that has stopped them before, because this is, I don't even know how many times around the cycle that, the Israelites have started worshiping other gods and gotten into trouble and had another people group or kingdom or whatever rule over them. So that's the main reason his parents objected. Probably. But Samson apparently really likes this young Philistine woman. So, he's... I don't know why he has to ask his parents to go get her, unless it had something to do with, paying, the bride price or whatever that they did back in those days. But interesting how God will even use things that go directly against previously stated commands in specific situations. Granted, this is not like a catch-all for everybody. This is not a general rule of thumb that we should follow in life. But in specific situations, God will use things that can even be in direct opposition to previously stated commands in order to, better his people, in order to help his people out. However you want to word that. But I'm getting that idea from verse 4 here, where it says, the Lord was at work in this being Samson wanting to marry a Philistine woman. And there are even things that prophets do later on in the Bible that seem to be in opposition to the Lord's commands. But again, in very specific situations, God might do these kinds of things. So, slight tangent, but related. If people ever ask, whether or not sin / going against something that God has stated could still potentially be from God, technically the answer is yes. Now, I think there are people out there who try to claim as much, oh, God told me this, that, and the other thing, when it wasn't really from God. But I'm not going to deny the possibility that something like that could happen, because we have evidence of it here and in other places in the Bible, especially the Old Testament. Maybe even one or two in the New Testament. But anyway, tangent done. Let's get back into the verses here. So we are at verse 5. As Samson and his parents were going down to Timnah, a young lion suddenly attacked Samson near the vineyards of Timnah. At that moment, the Spirit of the Lord came powerfully upon him, and he ripped the lion's jaws apart with his bare hands. He did it as easily as if it were a young goat, but he didn't tell his father or mother about it. When Samson arrived in Timnah, he talked with the woman and was very pleased with her. Okay, real quick. This whole thing about the Spirit coming powerfully on him and ripping the lion's jaws apart, this is something that Samson very much becomes known for. In fact, most people who don't even know a whole lot about the Bible, but know at least like a little bit, kind of like the, key stories or whatever, like this is usually the main story from Judges, that if there's anything from Judges anybody knows about, it's probably this. Not this little snippet of Samson here specifically, but the fact that Samson was ridiculously strong when filled with the Spirit. So, yeah, that very much comes into play later. A lot of people probably already know how, but we'll get there when we get there. I don't need to explain it right now. But it only happens when he is filled with the Spirit. He does not have this strength on his own. It's not even through any specific act of his that he has all this strength. Like, if that were the case, he wouldn't have needed the Spirit of the Lord to come upon him in this moment. He would have already had the strength. So anyway, he kills a lion that would have otherwise probably killed them as they're on the way to Timnah. He finds the woman and is, quote, very pleased with her. And then we get to verse 8. Later, when he returned to Timnah for the wedding, he turned off the path to look at the carcass of the lion, and he found that a swarm of bees had made some honey in the carcass. He scooped some of the honey into his hands and ate it along the way. He also gave some to his father and mother, and they ate it. But he didn't tell them he had taken the honey from the carcass of the lion. Again, this is the second thing related to the lion that he has not told his parents about. The secrecy here isn't exactly an upstanding trait of his. But in any case, I mean, that is something that would be a little awkward if you said where you got it from. Also, I guess nowadays we don't generally leave larger animal carcasses lying around long enough for something like this to happen, because I'm like, that sound like a normal thing that we would encounter today. Bees making honey in an animal carcass? I don't know. But, again, maybe that's just more our modern context making that seem weird. Anywho, moving on to verse 10. As his father was making final arrangements for the marriage, Samson threw a party at Timnah, as was the custom for elite young men. When the bride's parents saw him, they selected 30 young men from the town to be his companions. Samson said to them, "Let me tell you a riddle. If you solve my riddle during these 7 days of the celebration, I will give you 30 fine linen robes and 30 sets of festive clothing. But if you can't solve it, then you must give me 30 fine linen robes and 30 sets of festive clothing." "All right," they agreed. "Let's hear your riddle." Let me pause there for a sec. So final arrangements were being made for the marriage ceremony, but still at least a week out, because he's giving them 7 days to solve this riddle of his. And yeah, still though, there's a lot of little details to generally get finalized shortly before most wedding ceremonies and things like that. So I can't say that's terribly surprising. As far as a celebration like that being a custom, I mean, it says for elite young men, so clearly Samson wasn't exactly low class. But I don't know necessarily of a particular modern day equivalent to that. I mean, you have bachelor and bachelorette parties and things like that, but even those don't last a freaking 7-day time period. Like, I don't think anybody, other than maybe the richest of the rich, would spend an entire week on a party like that. Or at least I'm not aware of that happening in modern day. Footnote there at the bride's parents. Hebrew just says they. So they not necessarily being the bride's parents in the original Hebrew, but it leaves it kind of up to question who they would have been, because, I mean, it mentions his father singularly, and then Samson, unless it was the other elite young men, or the, I don't know. In any case, these 30 men were selected to be his companions, and then he wants to tell them the riddle, which goes as follows, starting in verse 14. So he said, "Out of the one who eats came something to eat. Out of the strong came something sweet. 3 days later, they were still trying to figure it out. On the 4th day, they said to Samson's wife, "Entice your husband to explain the riddle for us, or we will burn down your father's house with you in it. Did you invite us to this party just to make us poor?" So Samson's wife came to him in tears and said, "You don't love me. You hate me. You have given my people a riddle, but you haven't told me the answer." "I haven't even given the answer to my father or mother," he replied. "Why should I tell you?" So she cried whenever she was with him and kept it up for the rest of the celebration. At last, on the 7th day, he told her the answer because she was tormenting him with her nagging. Then she explained the riddle to the young men. Okay. So, he says this riddle. They can't figure it out. And, I mean, they're going to lose out on fine linen robes and sets of festive clothing if they don't get this riddle. So they put some pressure on Samson's wife, who still is not named, by the way. They put some pressure on Samson's wife to get the answer to the riddle from him. So then she puts the pressure on him to give her the answer, apparently over the course of multiple days. Finally, on the last day, he concedes and tells her, and then she tells the young men. We'll see what happens from there in a bit. But if you haven't, read anything further down, I'd be curious if anybody would really be able to figure this out. I'm pretty sure this is a riddle that was not meant to be figured out at all. This doesn't even sound like a lot of our modern day riddles. Because most of the time nowadays we try to give, any, significant context that would be needed to help figure out the riddle. Sometimes people don't, but anyway, just because of what I know in advance, this is something that, really these young men almost couldn't have known. But anyway, we'll get to that in a bit. Footnote there. The Greek version says on the 4th day, but Hebrew reads on the 7th. So there's different manuscripts that people pull from when translating the Bible. One is Greek, one is Hebrew, at least for the Old Testament. And it's usually different manuscripts, or a mix thereof, for different books of the Bible, because they didn't come out, they weren't originally written the way that we have modern day Bibles. They were all on, old scrolls that sometimes, in fact, often got at least somewhat damaged and things like that. But it makes more sense for that to be on the 4th day, because otherwise, this part would have happened on the same day. Now, granted, that could have then been attributed to him not being as patient, or I don't know. But this says 3 days later, they were still trying to figure it out. Why would it mention the 3 days later if they didn't ask for help from Samson's wife soon after that? Either way, this whole thing happens with them pressuring her and then her nagging him. So, eventually, the riddle gets explained to the young men through Samson's wife, or technically fiancé at this point, but anyway. Uh, enough of that whole thing. Let's move on to verse 18. So before sunset of the 7th day, the men of the town came to Samson with their answer. What is sweeter than honey? And what is stronger than a lion? Samson replied, If you hadn't plowed with my heifer, you wouldn't have solved my riddle. Bit of a crude way to say that, but I'll get back to that in a minute. Then the Spirit of the Lord came powerfully upon him. He went down to the town of Ashkelon, killed 30 men, took their belongings, and gave their clothing to the men who had solved his riddle. But Samson was furious about what had happened, and he went back home to live with his father and mother. So his wife was given in marriage to the man who had been Samson's best man at the wedding. Okay. And that might be why this Philistine woman was not named. Because she never wound up actually being Samson's wife. But, yeah. So, this whole phrase in here is basically him referring to the fact that they had, pressured his wife to give to get the answer from him. And since she was seemingly the only person that he told the answer to, and then so soon after these young men got the answer, it is pretty obvious that they got it from her. So he was upset because they basically cheated to get the answer. But still being a man of his word, I guess, he goes down to Ashkelon, kills 30 men, and basically gives the 30 young men who were, supposed to be his companions, going back up to the phrasing in verse 11, he basically the stuff he gets from Ashkelon, he gives to those young men. And after that, though, he's so frustrated with the whole situation that he storms off, doesn't end up even getting married to the woman. But I guess the ceremony was already kind of, prepared at that point. So the people who were there, I guess, just decided, we'll have this young woman marry the best man. I mean, usually the best man is someone who is acquainted with, or even related to the bride or the groom. And since this all happened in Timnah, which was presumably Philistine territory, it's likely that it was another Philistine man that she then ultimately wound up getting married to. And that's also why there was all this pressure being put on her by them, because they were probably all Philistines and, trying to stick together, help each other out, all that kind of stuff. But that is really all the more I have for Judges 14. Okay, so despite being a Nazirite, Samson seems like a bit of an unruly kind of man, in my opinion. This whole situation about wanting a Philistine wife, I mean, okay, that was actually also supposed to be sort of for God's purposes, possibly unbeknownst to Samson, but in any case, I can forgive him for that pretty easily. And then I guess maybe the other stuff that he does is also God working through him to, kind of help weaken the Philistines, for lack of a better way to put it. But I mean, just like, removed from that, Samson as a person would seem to not have the best character. Kind of a hot temper, be, lacking in impulse control, it would seem. But even somebody like that can be used by God. Not necessarily in every situation, mind you, but, we make no assumptions, nor should we make any assumptions on what kind of person God can or cannot use. Anyway, enough about that. As always, like and share if you enjoyed the video. Subscribe to the channel and click the bell if you're on YouTube to get updates when I post new videos. If you're seeing this on Rumble, give me a follow over there. Either way, look down in the description to get info on other social media pages and all that good stuff. And leave comments down below there with any thoughts you have. So that's going to do it for now. Hope you're all doing well. Hopefully I'll see you soon for another video. But whatever the case is, till next time, stay cool, people.